Good afternoon to you all. I'm David Gammon, and I hope you can now hear me. Welcome to this next information session about the Faculty of Science. As I think many of you will have probably listened in on the Dean of Science, Professor Ramasundela, giving a little bit of an overview about what is on offer in the Science Faculty in terms of the kinds of science that we do, the areas of study that you as prospective students can anticipate and that your parents will know you are doing. As you will see from this title slide, I'm an assistant dean in the Faculty of Science, and my role is to specifically assist the dean in relation to issues of student support. And that's why I'm going to talk a little bit to you today about the science faculty. Is the science faculty a supportive environment in which to learn science? So I thought I would address this question because as you perhaps weigh up different options that you've got in front of you now, one of the things you might be wondering is what will it actually be like? And to get into my studies here at UCT, and what can I anticipate in terms of support? Will I be left entirely on my own, or will there be people to help and so on? And I suppose what I'd like to show you very, very briefly is that, in fact, I think we do have a very supportive faculty, and we're very concerned about assisting students not only with their learning and to come to grips with the complexities of the sciences and the mathematics that they're studying, but also to try and support them in other ways with the various challenges that they face. So I'm going to give a 10 to 15 minute overview of this, and then we'll have a time of questions, and I will be assisted during those questions by our faculty manager, Karen Wienand. So we'll try and answer any questions that you have. So let's go straight into it then. I can get the next slide up. There we go. So I'm going to start off by putting this statement to you that I think what we believe in our faculty and indeed in the wider university is that effective learning, which is hopefully something we all want to achieve, will take place if the learning environment has the following qualities to it. It's stimulating, it's challenging, it's nurturing and supportive. And of course, we also recognize that students need guidance on the difference between the university environment and the school environment. So while I'll try and show you that we strive to meet all of these different requirements, we also have to remember that we're not a school, and there are significant differences, both in terms of the sheer numbers of people, but also what you as a prospective student can expect. So let's take each of those things very briefly, and I'll try and spell out what I mean by that. So a stimulating learning environment, you will have heard some of this from the Dean already. But let me just emphasize again that we're talking about receiving teaching and guidance from research active scientists, or many at the top of their fields, and it's an environment where new knowledge is being generated. So we teach obviously the established science, but we are exposing students to new knowledge and to the research environment. So it's in that sense we're sort of at the cutting edge. But there are many other activities that surround this, which will be assisting you and stimulating your interest in science. There are things like fieldwork opportunities, significant opportunities in certain disciplines to get out there to do active research and to see and to learn how to observe and ask the right questions. And hopefully we will provide a firm foundation so that you can ask the right questions, but also expose students to open-ended questions. And I think this is something we strive to do. So those are a few ways in which we will try and provide a stimulating learning environment. So what about the challenging? In what ways will this challenging? So no doubt you will have heard via the grapevine, through social media, maybe, and through things that people say. You might have some ideas about what it's like to study at university, and maybe even UCT specifically. You might think that it's going to be very difficult or not so difficult, or whatever is your preconceived idea. Well, it's going to be challenging because we are precisely trying to do that. We are trying to stretch the mind a bit, to take you a little bit beyond what you currently think and understand, and in some ways very far beyond that. So we will not be satisfied with just a superficial understanding or kind of just little facts that you can just regurgitate and so on. Not as we will look for a much deeper understanding in the way we teach and what we expect. Obviously, we'll be promoting questioning and critical thinking and open-mindedness so that you are allowed to ask questions and to say, well, is that really true? And on what evidence do you base that? And these, of course, are vital qualities in society in general, let alone in scientific thinking. I think you will all agree that if we are able to do this, we can collectively go much further. And we're gearing everybody and the students towards solving complex, relevant problems. So again, you will have heard about that. Science strives to be in the service of society and to address very real problems. And so there's no rote learning to be found here. We're looking for deep understanding. Now, all of this is great, but it can be very challenging. So it can be challenging in a positive sense, but it can be maybe almost disturbing as you are pushed and stretched maybe beyond what you think you can manage. And so you're bound to have times when you really wonder if you might feel all alone or think this is a bit too much for me. And so there has to be, in addition to that challenging environment, a nurturing environment, a way in which we can understand the needs of each other and attend to those needs. And so we want to help students to understand and work through their difficulties. We're not going to encourage you to escape your difficulties or walk away from them, but rather to face up to them. And we will provide help, and we do provide help where it's necessary, but also try and develop an independence. It's important, I think, that we continue to counter the stereotype, which you might have in your minds even, that scientists are cold and uncaring and somehow distracted and not able to care for each other. I think that's not a correct stereotype at all. We're human beings. We do sometimes become a little distracted, that's true. The classic image of an absent-minded professor and all that, that's true, because we get so excited and involved in our science. But there are many, many of us who are deeply concerned about students and trying to help. Of course, we want to promote inclusivity, respect and acceptance. And a part of this, this caring for each other and looking out for situations where people are not doing very well, it's in part to promote science itself as a creative, collaborative endeavor, rather than one done in isolation. So science, again, there might be a perception that it's individuals working on their own, but in fact, it's a collective of people. And so therefore, it's very important that we learn to get on with each other and that we learn to recognize when people are not doing so well. And moving then, that moves into the idea of a supportive learning environment. So I'm going to divide that into two things and speak briefly about each of those. And basically tell you about things that you can expect to see in the science faculty at UCT in relation to these two things. So the first is academic support. What can we provide? So again, if you think about your own situation at school, you will have support from your teachers and from people, maybe coaches, sports coaches, others. And many of you might also have academic help from others, from tutors and so on. And can you expect to have any of this at university? Well, yes and no. In many ways, you have to learn to be independent in your working habits and your thinking. But we do have, first of all, we try and help students with learning how to learn. So right from the word go in the orientation program, we endeavor to get across to students that the way you learn at university and tertiary studies is not exactly the same as you do at school. You need to accept that, but we also don't expect that you will automatically know how to do that. And so we have specific interventions, workshops, both compulsory and voluntary, where you can look at ideas and about how to modify the way you learn. When you're, for example, faced with very complex stuff in your first mathematics course at university, and you kind of just don't know how to get it all organized in your mind, that's the sort of thing we can try and guide you on, even though you will have to, of course, do the work. We also explore barriers to learning. So we're well aware that for many students, language is a real challenge and a real issue. English might not be your first language, and you've had to perhaps learn in English, even though you don't always understand everything. And inevitably, you will find stuff that you simply don't understand. You feel embarrassed. You don't want to go up to the lecturer and say, "I'm sorry, I do not know anything about what you are saying." But we will try and help you to navigate that difficulty. And of course, lecturers themselves are increasingly paying attention to this, so that the communication is clear and we're not leaving someone behind because they can't understand. There are, of course, other issues, and we also try and deal with them, some around culture and so on, which are brought to bear in this learning environment. I want to highlight quickly a very interesting development which you will encounter, not necessarily when you arrive, if you arrive next year, but towards the end of the year. We are in the process of a very exciting new development, a new science learning center, which is in fact precisely a kind of home for us to do all of this kind of supportive work. So it's going to be an entire floor of one building that's being refurbished. There will be places for people to gather, to work informally, but also to have formal sessions, place to meet other students, to help each other. So this is a really exciting development at UCT, and we may well be the first ones in the country to have something on this scale of this kind. We already have a small learning center which has been very effective, but we're now going big on this, and it's precisely to create the kind of supportive academic environment. We also have, for example, peer tutoring initiatives. So this is where other students are available to help first-year students, and we've got some very successful initiatives both within specific departments like in mathematics or chemistry or physics or biology, but also more broadly across the whole faculty. And students often find it's a lot easier they find their own peers, their own fellow students more approachable and so on. Even though we like to think that we as the lecturers are approachable, we can understand that people are sometimes a little bit scared of us, or they think we're weird or something like that. And then finally, in this little topic about academic support, I want to briefly mention the extended degree program, which some of you may have heard about. So this is not something that you apply to get into at the beginning. You simply are applying to get into the BSc program, and you will be accepted for that. But what we recognize is that as the studies get going, there are some of you who will begin to realize that things are moving a bit too fast for you. And so we have a very interesting approach where we, about 6 weeks into the term, we have a process where we engage with students, we do a little bit of testing and so on, and we try and evaluate whether with your particular needs for the pace at which you are comfortable to work and so on, it might be better for you to switch from a 3-year BSc program to a 4-year program. So the details of that will all be provided in the course of the first few weeks, and you don't need to worry about that now, because it's not in any way a pre-selected program. And it's quite precisely intended that we want students themselves to try and come to this understanding, to gauge their own progress. We would rather not, in fact, tell you up front, this is the way you should go. We would rather you begin to find this out, and then guide you and be available for you to discuss this with you. And to that extent, I, as the assistant dean, together with a number of other student advisors, engage in quite extensive discussions with students to make sure that they make the right decision. So that's something, just to alert you to that, it's something which kicks in during the first part of the year, and you will be given all the information that you need about that. But it's a very a successful program in assisting students who, for whatever reason, prefer to work a little bit more slowly and struggle maybe to make the transition from school and so on. And then finally, the other side of support that we do is it's very much integrated with the academic support, because we realize that they're connected. And it can be referred to as psychosocial support. Well, that's a kind of big word, which just means support when you're really not feeling great. Okay, so I think we all know that this is a complicated thing. Sometimes because your work isn't going so well, you feel bad and you feel, you know, anxious, or you feel sad and so on. Or maybe so it can be you're doing fine and suddenly the work gets very hard and you start feeling bad. But it can work the other way around as well, where other things in your life, in fact, you're far from home, or you're having difficulties in relationships, or you're not feeling well, that can cause you to not feel well, and that can affect your academic work. So these two things work both ways. And so there are ways that we deal with this, not only us in the faculty, but in the university as a whole. So here's just a couple of them. The one is that we make sure that there are very clear, what I call points of contact. So what we realize is that students often simply don't know. They don't know where to go. They might even not know what it is that is the problem. And so what we find is very useful for us to have people, student advisors, myself as assistant dean, the staff in the faculty at the front desk, people who students can go to and they can say, look, I'm not feeling great at the moment, or I'm having some difficulties, who can I speak to? And there's somebody who will either speak to you directly or will have a brief conversation and then say, look, I think who you need to speak to is person X, and we will refer. So this works very well in the faculty. And it's important for students to have a very clearly definable place to go, especially when they don't know where to go. And so we try and make sure that the academics and tutors, so that's lecturers and tutors and all of us, are accessible as possible. Now, this might mean that you have to make an appointment with large numbers of students. Of course, the person involved can't see everyone all at once, so it might involve making an appointment, but certainly within a day or two, in most cases, you can find somebody to speak to. But very often there's a kind of an open door where you can just pop in and you can ask questions. Tutors, who are very often the students, are very good at keeping in touch with the students that they tutor. Many of them, use WhatsApp and all sorts of things just to keep in touch. And we do have mentors as well in some departments. And then, of course, as I said, we try and refer. We recognize that we can't, and we're not professionally qualified to deal with all problems, certainly health problems, psychological problems, and so on. And the university as a whole has very good units, excellent units, in fact. And I, as the assistant dean in particular, keep in very close contact with with my colleagues in these departments, the student wellness service, and so on. So that if necessary, I can intervene directly, and we can either simply ask someone to go make an appointment, or if that student is clearly needing some help with that, I can phone up and say, look, this student needs help. Okay, so that's the kind of things, and of course I've just touched on a few of them, but I suppose I'm hoping that this will emphasize that we do try and look after the whole student, all the different dimensions, bearing in mind that the key thing for students to remember is that they need to be prepared to go and ask for help. It's perhaps in that way distinctive from the school environment. You won't necessarily have someone always watching and tracking your progress, but if you are willing to simply say, I need help, there will be someone to help. Okay, so that I think completes my overview. We'll stop for questions in a moment. Let me just perhaps put up right away 2 email addresses where you can send further questions if your question is not dealt with during the session that we'll have in a moment. So the first one is for general queries, or if there are follow-up questions related to this presentation after we've finished here, then please send an email to this sci-science@UCT. That's our general faculty email address. It will then be forwarded by the staff who monitor this to one of us. It will be myself or the faculty manager or one of the student advisors. We'll follow that up. If you, and we are aware that a number of people have very specific queries related, for example, to international school leaving examinations. And here we have a designated staff member, Tasneem Mohammed. This is her email address, and she is really on top of all the intricacies of that and can advise you very specifically. So please feel free to do that. But I'll end on that note, and thank you very much for your attention. And we invite you, if you haven't already, to pose questions in the chat room, where my colleague Karen is standing by to field those. And between us, we will now try and answer some of the key questions that you have. So thank you very much. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Karen Vinant now, and perhaps just ask her to alert us to any questions that have come in.
Thanks, David. There is a question that I think maybe you are best placed to respond to. I'll read it to you. It says, and I'll put it in the chat. Hi there, how will this support system work, taking into account the new COVID-19 setting?
Aha. Yeah, very good question. Very good question, and I probably should have said a little bit more about that in general. So in general, yes, we are of course at the moment in sort of planning mode for next year, realizing that the reality we will be in will be quite different to what we've had in the past. Perhaps so let me first say that there will be systems in place, and those will be made very clear to students. We're probably not quite at the point where we can tell you exactly how it will work. However, what I can tell you is that we've effectively faced this now, of course, with our students not being on campus. And we've managed to do it, support quite effectively, actually, through email, through telephone calls, and from WhatsApp. So we've got an effective system where students can pose questions. They can send them to me or to the student advisors. I deal with a lot of queries, and in many cases I can resolve it by email or forward the student to the right place. Sometimes it's a question about stuff like IT support, for example, or counseling, the need for counseling. So I can do that. I quite often will reply also to the student and say, look, if you'd prefer to have a chat, send me your cell phone number and I will contact you, and we do that. So what we will need to do, obviously, is to adapt next year, and I suspect that we will have a combination of some sort of face-to-face options for giving support, but we will probably continue with our methods of online inquiries, with some of us then following up with that. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay, and then there's another question about changing your courses once lectures have started. So I'd just like to explain a bit about making changes to your direction of studies. So we allow you to change, even though you may apply for particular areas of study, we'll allow you to change during the registration process. I mean, that's what our orientation and registration process is about. We give you more information about what we offer, and we allow you to change. But then there is only a week after the start of lectures during which you can then change the courses that you've registered for. So that's quite a small window, but it's also because the pace of studies at university is so fast that after a week, it's actually, you've gone too far to actually be added to another course. You'd have fallen too far behind. So it's just a week after the start of lectures.
I wonder if I could add something to that, Karen, because that's a very good question. There's another kind of change that students often are faced with. and that is when they want to change maybe at the end of the year. So just to tell you, what we try and do is at the beginning of the year advise students to take a general selection of courses if they're not quite sure. And very often this means that from their second year or onwards, they in fact have quite a wide choice of options from there on. So it's not as if you make a decision on day one and then you're stuck in something for the next 3 or 4 years. Not at all. There are often sets of courses which are quite flexible and lead to a number of different specializations, if you like, in the science degree.
Thanks, David. Yes, that's quite important. And there don't seem to be any more questions. I think I've answered and picked up on all of them. David, there was a question about asking about smaller group offerings. So besides lectures, are there any tutorials? I don't know if you want to just elaborate on that. I did respond that we do offer smaller group tutorial sessions in all courses, but yes. I don't know if you want to add about anything else, any of the mentor sessions or things like that. Yes.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Yes, so that's an interesting question as well. And again, perhaps it's important to say that at the moment the university is planning on still being in some sort of COVID restrictions in terms of the sizes of classes, and so it's quite possible that in general there won't be very large classes. I mean, sometimes the classes are very large, 200, 300 in a very large lecture theatre, and it's probable that in the first part of next year that won't happen, and so in a way we will in any case be restricted to having smaller groups. But and so it's likely that the way the first year will play out for you if you come next year is that in fact you will be allocated to smaller groups simply because of the safety, the health and safety issues. But in addition to that, anyway, most courses do they have lectures, which would be to a bigger group of students, but then they divide students up into smaller groups for more closer attention in sessions, maybe based around a problem set or something like that. So and of course in laboratory-based sciences like chemistry, physics, biology, geology, and so on, you would also do practical sessions during the week, and those would typically be in small groups, maybe even working as pairs. So there is definitely quite a lot of opportunity for doing that. It's quite an important social aspect, I think, of doing science as well. You have an opportunity to get to know a smaller group of people who you might see quite regularly and so on. In addition to that, yes, there are opportunities for actual support sessions in smaller groups. So these will be advertised at the beginning of the year, and they're set up at different times of the day. So if you are struggling with a particular issue related to the way you approach your academic studies, or things like time management, or facing issues like stress, and you're wondering how to cope with this, we have small group sessions where, and these typically are 5 to 10, maybe 15 people at the most, get together and meet regularly. So there's that option as well. Has anything else come in?
Yes, so a few have come through now. There's a question about changing majors rather than just the courses. So yes. David, would you like to? And yes. There's also, yes, so there's a question about, is it possible to major in 2 different areas of study? So I can quickly respond to that one, which yes, generally that you should choose 2 majors, but some students choose more than that. Provided the curriculum allows it and the timetable. Could I quickly answer the one on some majors being more competitive than others? David, could you want to answer that one?
Okay. Yes, again, that's an interesting question. It probably is the case, yes, although I'm not sure I could give you a very definitive quantitative answer to that. There are, it depends how you think of it. So an example, I guess, is something like computer science, which at the moment has a lot of, in a sense, obvious entries into the marketplace, into the workplace. And I don't actually know the numbers for sure, but I would imagine that with a degree in computer science, you have a pretty good chance of getting a job in computer science. And others like geology are competitive because there are relatively few people who go into that that disciplinary area, and it's an important industry in this country, and so that's competitive for that reason. The biological and molecular sciences, again, there are. It's difficult to say whether they're more or less competitive than, say, computer science. But I think that could well be that disciplines like computer science are very competitive. But let me just add something to that. An important thing to think about when you're entering science is not just necessarily only which very specific job might be related to your major, but think of it also as gaining what I call generic skills. So I've had specific discussions with people in the careers service about this, as well as employers, and what they've said to us is that they look very positively at someone with a science degree, almost irrespective of what their major is, because they know that if you've done a science degree, you've picked up skills along the way, like numeracy, the ability to work with numbers, with difficult mathematical concepts, skills regarding interpretation of data, working with data, ways to visualize things, problem solving. So those, I would say, any major that you do in science, you will acquire those generic skills, and those are really what are important in today's world. You may not, if you do biochemistry, walk straight into a biochemistry job, but the skills that you gain and will be transferable to other scientific disciplines and so on. So I hope that maybe does answer it somewhat. What you might want to do to find out more specific information is go to the UCT Careers Service. You can get that through the university website. Or you could send a query very specifically, and we will redirect it to someone in the relevant department. If you want to know, how competitive is such and such a major, we can certainly try and point you in the right direction. I see, Karen, there's a question about computer science under EBE and science. Shall I have a go at that one?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a question. It says computer science is listed under both engineering and science. And in fact, it does crop up in the commerce faculty as well. And is it more computer science oriented under the Faculty of Science, or is it similar in both faculties? So as you know, computers and computer science and related disciplines are of course applicable over a wide range of things. In the science faculty, you have an option of doing computer science itself and computer engineering. And as you can imagine, the emphasis is slightly different in those two disciplines, but complementary. Computer engineering, in broad outline, deals more with the sort of hardware side of things, whereas the discipline of computer science is more with the software, with programming and with understanding the programming languages and so on. So there's that broad distinction. And if you were wanting to study computer science in any of these guises specifically, I would say science is probably better because they have more specific programs directed towards that. In engineering, you would encounter it in the context of something like electrical engineering or mechanical engineering. In the commerce faculty, and the computer science department works very close with commerce on this, they have a discipline of information systems, which is really the part of computer science which is more oriented towards applications in business. So all of these things are interrelated. I think I would suggest that if you get a strong foundation in computer science, in the real foundations of it, and understand it fully, you can essentially go in any of these directions. So I hope that helps. Shall I see there's some questions about will most classes be online next year? Maybe, and you've answered that, Karen. Sorry, I saw that. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so that's maybe to repeat what we said earlier. It's likely that there will be a blend between online and face-to-face lectures. So certainly you can anticipate that. So in other words, students will be receiving material and interacting with it online, but then depending on the realities of the broader health situation that we're in, there will definitely be an attempt to have classes and laboratory sessions and so on. Yeah.
Okay, and then I see there's the very common question of transferring to MBCHB studies.
Okay.
So do you want to do that one, David, or must I?
Shall I have a go at that?
Yes.
Yeah, right. So the question is, yes, if you do a BSc, can you transfer in your second year to medicine? And if you can, what marks will you need to obtain? So the short answer is yes, you can, definitely. Transfer to medicine, and the answer to the second question is what marks will you need to obtain? The answer is 100% for every subject. If you get 100%, I'm prepared to put my head on the block that they will accept you. That's quite a tough thing to get, but I guess what I'm saying to you is that you have to do well. Medicine is very competitive. There are a lot of people trying to get in. And the reality is that each year we probably have, I would guess, between 5 and 10 people from the science faculty transferring into medicine, having completed successfully a first year, or even a successful in their second year. So a relatively small number transfer, but they certainly do. And because it's so competitive, you need to get high marks. I would say you should aim for 70% and above in all of your subjects.
And then David, could you respond to the question about the difference between applied statistics and mathematics?
Yes. So the question is, yeah, difference between those two, and which would be better for someone who has an interest in data science or machine learning. So mathematics at university is it's a more abstract discipline, so it's really dealing with the absolute fundamentals of mathematical theories and the way you think in mathematics. So that is, of course, an extremely useful insight and skill to have, because if you understand the basics of mathematics, then you can probably do any mathematics. You can do statistics, you can do applied statistics, and so on. But the reality is that it is fairly abstract and theoretical, and there are some people who really enjoy that sort of thing and can go far in that. There are a number of other more applied disciplines. So this is where aspects of mathematics, like statistics, the how to deal with a vast amount of data and correctly interpret things and observe trends and describe them and so on. So those have clearly got huge applications across a wide number of disciplines. It's true in things like the biological sciences, where you're dealing with observations of large numbers of events or animals or whatever. But it's equally true, as we know now, in things like health, with the monitoring of pandemics like the COVID and so on. And so applied statistics, or statistics itself, would be probably slightly more relevant if you really see yourself as going into a more practical, applied area where you're taking those skills and you're applying them to problems. So if you're interested in going into data science or machine learning, well, I think that probably the best answer is that you would need both, because the better equipped you are in terms of a deep understanding of what you're doing, the better you will be able to apply that in other areas. So you've got to weigh up a little bit and ask yourself, what it is that you most enjoy doing. If you do pure mathematics, it will take you down a very deep and complex, more abstract route. The applied is probably better if you really are absolutely sold on going into something like data science, then I would say the applied. Yeah.
So there are a number of more questions that have come in. I've responded to some of them.
Okay.
I see I'm on, if lectures are online for science. Yeah, but do you want to answer the one about living in residence?
Online for science, are students still allowed to live in residence on campus? Yes, indeed, they are. It's recognized that for many students, they need to be in residence in order to access Wi-Fi and so many other things. So certainly the intention at the moment is that students will be in residence. Of course, this all depends on the COVID situation and so on, but indeed. Yeah, so there's some specific questions I'm seeing here about, so for example, what are the best subjects for computer science degree and where can one get information on how to change majors? So if you've got any questions along those lines, which are quite specific, it might be better for you to email us on one of those things, because that we don't want to perhaps spend too much, otherwise we'd have to go through every single one of them. All of the details will be available at registration. And in fact, before registration, because we anticipate that we may be doing a lot of stuff online, there will be information that will be made available online in advance as well. So you can get information via the handbooks, which are available on the university website. But we will be providing further information to guide you through what exactly it is that you need to do if you want to do, for example, a computer science major. So as an example, computer science, you would be required to do a maths course. In fact, all students have to do a first-year maths course. And then, of course, you'd have to do computer science. And in that case, those are the essential ones, but you will be advised to do other what we call electives, which are kind of optional courses, to put together a package of 3 or 4 courses which broaden your base, particularly in that first year. And so the information on changing majors and so on will also be given at the beginning of the year. So probably best not to worry too much about that sort of detail at this stage, other than to take assurance that we will be able, we would definitely provide that kind of information and the procedures about how to do that.
Okay, I think there's a number of questions that I think relate to transferring between faculties. Okay. Now, we have responded specifically about transferring into health sciences, but just to provide sort of a more general statement that it is possible to move between faculties and degrees. So a student can move from a BSc to engineering. You get credit for some of the courses if you do so, but all of that is information you should get once you are, you are registered for your particular degree. And then usually it will not happen within the first year. You'd have to finish your year and then apply to transfer to another faculty. And generally the results that you've achieved in your in that first year will be taken into account. So you can't say you weren't happy and that's why you didn't do well. The requirement for any moving to a different qualification will be to just get the best results possible.
Okay, I'm thinking that we're probably reaching the end of our time here. So there are a couple of questions here about what happens if in your trial exams you drop in the marks that you need and so on. So I think that information, Karin, do you want to comment briefly on that? Perhaps just very briefly summarize the marks that you need in order to get the final offer.
Okay, so generally, since we guarantee a place of study for a BSc if you achieve about 660 points and above. Now that equates to an average of about 83%. So if you should aim to get above 83% for every subject to stand the best chances of being accepted. Below that is we take it as we go down the points, and it depends on the capacity and how many people meet those requirements. And I think I'm not sure if I think I picked up on a question where someone asked if your marks have dropped. We don't really look at if your marks have dropped or increased. We look at your actual final results. So if it's dropped relative to an earlier result, if you were made an early offer on higher results and now you drop, you will still get that offer provided you meet the points at which we are offering. And then the last question is the field of physics competitive? As I think I've responded to another query, that if you are accepted for a BSc, you can do physics. It's not competitive, but you do need to, for your own peace of mind and comfort in studies, you should be achieving, I would say, above 80% for physical science at school to be comfortable studying physics as a major. And then I think there's one more question. Okay, so somebody said thank you, the last one.
That was me.
Oh, was that you? Okay.
So I've just put up there to kind of round things off. It is just to thank everybody for participating and thank you for your questions, and we wish you well in the decisions that you have to make. And really just to emphasize that you should feel free to email that general email address if you still have questions, and we will try and assist you. So thank you very much.